Alright, now moving on to the two riots that the nation faced after the Japanese occupation on the British return. First one is called Anti-NS Service Riots. The main thing about why these riots erupted is here. This is your point, lack of concern for local interests. Alright, why exactly was there a lack of concern for the local interests? In particular, it is the Chinese middle school students. So, going back to the background, they had limited opportunity to pursue a university education in Singapore. So they had to go to China to further their studies. There's not enough schools. In particular, there's not enough Chinese educated schools because most of them they cannot speak English, right? So they have to go to Chinese schools, and they want to go to China to further their studies. After they finish their primary school, secondary school, and so on and so forth, they need to go to university. But there's no NUS at the point in time yet. Alright, there's no NTU, NUS. There's only British school, right? British university, British focused university, English focused universities. So most of them they have to go to China. They want to go to China for their studies. But again, at that point in time, there was a big war, a cold war between democracy and communism. So communism was seen as something very negative, right? Was seen as taking away the freedom of the people. It's a political system whereby you don't have much freedom. Okay, so the British were fearful of communism, and China just became communism, right? China became communist, right, at around 1949 plus minus. China became communist, and therefore, if you will go to China, right, you may get brainwashed into thinking and wanting to spread communist ideas into Singapore. That is bad, because if you do that, freedom is going to be taken away. Freedom of the people is going to be taken away. So the colonial government actually banned people who visited China from returning to Singapore. And so if you want to go to China to study, you cannot come back. Basically, that's what they're trying to say. Okay? So the students can no longer pursue their university education in China unless they choose never to return to Singapore. So this will make them very angry, right? Very unhappy. Also because there's already poor job prospects, because most of the civil service jobs, right? Most of the jobs basically in business and so on and so forth at that point in time were catered, all the high paying jobs were catered more towards the British, and so these were more English educated, English speaking ruling class civil service jobs. And most of these Chinese local students, they could not end up in these positions. Okay, they end up they're following their family business. Alright, which may be good, which may also not be good, but basically they don't have much opportunities because of this. Okay, so this make them very unhappy. Now, how did NS aggravate? NS was the tipping point, right? The background, they were already experiencing unhappiness from all these things, but NS was actually the tipping point that made them even more angry and led to the result of riots. So NS, because NS already mean a further disruption of their studies, their studies were already disrupted when the Japanese came, right? And then it was 3.5 years of tough rule in which they can't really study much, right? Or they had to learn Japanese. But what's the point of learning Japanese? Because once the Japanese left, all these things are no use already. So there was a lot of further disruption. And furthermore, now you ask them to go for NS again, another 2 years of disruption. By the time they finish everything, probably they'll be maybe 26, 27, 28 years old, which is quite old for them already. Wasted a lot of good years of working, a lot of good years of salary as well. Okay? Also, the way the British communicated the objective of NS, right? It was in English, or it was poorly translated. And so this led to a lot of miscommunication, right? They thought that many of them, when they enlist to NS, it's not just for training, but you actually be sent to the Malayan jungles, because in Malaysia itself, there was a communist insurgency, a communist uprising in Malaysia. So many of them thought that you want me to go NS because you want me to help fight for you against my fellow Chinese people in Malaya who are having a communist uprising there. So they are not happy about this, right? I want to study. I want to make my life better. I don't want to go and fight, right? Fight in the Malayan jungles. Okay, so there was a lot of miscommunication happening. Again, the language barrier was one of the things that resulted in this. And so Many of these Chinese students started peaceful demonstrations, right? Petitioning for a postponement. However, it was rejected, outrightly rejected. Again, lack of communication, lack of the language. The language barrier was very strong, so the request was rejected. And not only the request was rejected, but instead of having peace talks, right, dialogue to end and come to a solution, the colonial government actually deployed police to end the demonstration. Okay, which led to a clash with the police. And so, because of this clash, they continued demonstrating the movement, right? When the more you bring people down, the more they'll rise up again, right? So more demonstrations continue and happen, with Chongqing students locking themselves up in the school as part of the protest. So as a result, the British said, okay, we need to postpone the national service, but not demolish it totally. And so therefore, the British didn't really listen to them, right? So this lead to further distrust about the British. So they believe that the British were actually not genuine. Constitutional changes are changes in the local policy, how the country is governed. Basically, the removal of NS, right? So they didn't do it. So hence, led to more groups to fight for this freedom, right? So the student unions were formed in order to help fight for, to meet the needs of the Chinese middle school students. So therefore, this is how national service led to the uprising, led to the riots, led to unhappiness, aggravation of the people, right? NS was the tipping point, right? The straw that broke the camel's back. But they were already very unhappy because previously they were not allowed to go back to China to study. If they were to do so, they cannot come back because the British were fearful of communism. So all this unhappiness eventually erupted and led to a riot inside Singapore itself. Now, moving on to the Hock Lee Bus Riots. Okay, this one is more towards the workers' working condition. It's about the pay, it's about the working condition that remain unresolved, right? They were very poor working conditions and very poor pay. So, normally when you have poor working conditions and poor pay and long hours, who do you look for to help fight for your rights? It is the trade unions, right? They are organizations meant to help the workers, right? Help to appeal to the employees, help to appeal to the government to create some policies to help improve the lives of the workers. If you felt you're overpaid, overworked, and underpaid and overworked. All right. But the problem here is that the British colonial government, right? They didn't really see eye to eye with the trade unions. Okay, why is this so? One of these unions was called the Singapore Bus Workers Union. Why is it that they are unable to work well? Because of suspicion, right? The British were very suspicious of all these unions because it was infiltrated by communist influence. Again, going back to the Anti-NS Riots, right? And why they cannot go back to China because of communist influence. So the British believed that there were many communist influence hiding inside these trade unions, and the trade unions were not really fighting for the rights of the workers, but more for fighting to turn Singapore into a communist country. So they are very fearful of all these trade unions. And so when the trade unions make demands for the workers, there was a lot of distrust there. And you know, when there's distrust, things cannot be done, right? Okay? So instead of listening to the trade unions and helping the workers, many of these trade unions often were arrested, right? People were arrested, right? Put in jail, right? On suspicion of being communist. So again, nothing much could be done because these trade unions were all arrested. Nothing much could be done for the actual workers who needed better working conditions and better pay. So everything remained unresolved because trade unions were not effective, right? And so the workers took it upon themselves to go out and protest and strike against their employers, right? Against the company, not against the government. It was against the company because the companies were the ones that were giving them poor pay and poor working conditions. One of which was the Hock Lee Bus Company. So they went to their company leaders, their company executives, and demanded for better pay and working conditions. And the British, instead of managing the situation well by having dialogue session, what did the British do? they just send in the police, right? This is a disruption of civil peace, and so they send in the police to control the workers, right? So you can see here, they send in the police, spray the water, spray the tear gas on all the people. So all these people just wanted pay and working conditions, but they didn't get it. Instead, the police came in, right? Say your demands are not valid, right? They came in to help the employers, and they went to spray water, all these things, which caused a lot of unhappiness, right? All these things eventually led to unhappiness, like, hey, why you not listening to me? Why you not taking care of my needs? So the next thing I will do after the protest is I will fight, right? I will have a riot, and therefore all this unhappiness came about, and people became very unhappy, which resulted in the outbreak of riots. Okay, so that are your two riots and the reason why they happened.